and watching him on the balcony, and he started to do his initial prayer and speech to the crowd out there in Italian, and I thought, I'm not sure what he's saying. Then he switched to Spanish, and I thought, okay, quit showing off, you little jerk. But
against such as these, all the arguments by which we disprove the principle of separation of church and state are conclusive. So that is, that Pope Leo XIII was denying the validity of the idea of separation of church and state.
Friends, there is so much happening prophetically. We have to keep our eyes on the signs of the times as we keep our focus on Jesus Christ. This is part of the final movements. So we are seeing some prophetic events here happening. I'm not going to waste your time. We're going to run through a few articles here, read a few things. And then we have a video from Dr. Vine where he was on Isaac Olatunji Jr.'s YouTube channel. This is a good video. This is a good video, and I would recommend it. There's going to be a link in the description of this video. Let's run through these articles very quickly. Pope Leo XIV call for unity at inaugural mass meets Zelensky. Many of the world leaders, famous people, came and met the Pope at his inauguration. This Pope will war. I don't know even what that even means, but the point is they look into the Pope as the one who is going to bring about the necessary change. Now, there's been some changes made. John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, Pope Francis, but people are looking to this Pope as the one who is going to solve the world's problem, bring unity and peace, and even heal the wounds of the papacy. We are told also Pope Leo condemns exploitation of the poor and calls for unity in the church at inaugural mass. So there is that element of the poor. It's similar to Pope Francis, right? The brother of Pope Leo says he is like a Pope Francis 2.0.
The world will now call your brother Pope.
That's right.
You arguably know him better than most people. What kind of person is he?
A regular run-of-the-mill person. I think because he was trained in missionary work in South America for so many years, he will be looking out for the disenfranchised. He will be looking out for the poor. He will be looking out for those that don't have a voice. So I think he will follow in St. Francis. Pope Francis.
I was going to say, how is he different from Pope Francis? Or will he be different?
I don't know that you'll see a big difference. He met Pope Francis before he was Pope when he was in Argentina and my brother was in Peru. So that's how the connection began. I think they kind of believed in the same issues. So I don't know that there'll be much difference. He might prove me wrong, but I don't see there'll be much of a tradition breaking the tradition of Pope Francis.
In a former video, I did say this man is going to be more effective. Not only is he going to be effective, but he's going to carry out some of the elements of Pope Francis in a much more powerful way. And keep in mind, he speaks English. And that means a lot for a lot of people.
It was very special to meet Pope Leo today. He came down to meet some of the journalists. We were fortunate to be among the few that he met. And he said to us, ABC News, you're the guys who tracked down my brothers. They've been on TV more than me. Which was a fun little joke. It made us laugh. Those with us laughed too. He gave us a rosary to remember the visit, which was very special as well. And it struck me, I met Pope Francis and he was very personable, very charming, but there was a language barrier. And now we have a Pope in Leo, the first American Pope, for whom English is his first language. And it is very special to have these moments where, we can just sort of chat off the cuff. And it strikes me that this is going to be the reality now for the next 10, 15, 20 years possibly of his papacy, where we have a Pope who can just speak casually to journalists in English. And it's going to transform the way that we understand the papacy and transform the way that the papacy is covered by journalists.
One more article here we have is Pope Leo calls for unity to be of leaven of unity and love. The word unity and love being used in the same sentence again. But the Pope claims to have the leaven of love to evangelize the world under Catholicism. Interesting. right? There's also in scripture, we are told to be aware of the leavens of the Pharisees, their false doctrine and their hypocrisy. There's also the leaven in scripture. When a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Leaven can also be used in a positive way. Leaven in 3 courses of a meal in Christ's parable. But I just listen to the word leaven here. I'm like, what does that even mean? This Pope is also being styled as a bridge builder. Cardinal Gregory Dolan is speaking here. And listen to what Cardinal Gregory Dolan says as far as his opinion regarding the Pope. Take a listen.
I would back up what Cardinal McElroy said. I don't think the fact that Cardinal Prevost was from the United States had much weight. I like the comment of the gentleman who just spoke. It should not startle us that we would look to Pope Leo as a bridge builder. That's what the Latin word pontiff means. He's a bridge builder. Will he want to build bridges to Donald Trump? I suppose, but he would want to build bridges with the leader of every nation.
This is another priest as well, John Lydon, said exactly the same thing. This Pope is going to be a bridge builder.
And he's a good listener. I think he'll be a bridge builder, not only within the church, but for our world as well. So I think it's a blessing not only for the Catholic Church, I think it's a blessing for the world in this time of great division and war. His first words were Jesus' words, peace be with you. I think he'll be a pope that promotes that peace.
So if we were to put a resume together for this pope, we are learning a number of things, right? Is the name Pope Leo XIV, which takes on after Pope Leo XIII. So we have to study the past a little bit. He's taking on after Pope Francis. He is going to push the ecumenical movement even more. He's calling for unity. He cares about the poor. He supposedly cares about the planet. He also cares about the planet. So he's also believing the climate change movement. But this Pope has some traditional values to him. He's also saying that marriage is between a man and a woman. And some people can't stand that fact.
Tonight on Currents News, after peace talks between Russia and Ukraine end with no peace in sight, Pope Leo XIV has an idea for future negotiations. The Holy Father is speaking out, affirming the teachings of the Church when it comes to marriage and abortion.
I always think it's exciting to watch the conclave and look for the black smoke and the white smoke and just the ceremony of it. During these very trying times in our country, we certainly need spiritual leadership because of some of the things that we're experiencing. I'm a little concerned about this choice for the LGBTQ plus community. In 2012, he gave an address to bishops, and he lamented the popular culture fostered and sympathy for beliefs and practices that are at odds with the gospel, and that's a quote. And then he cited the homosexual lifestyle and alternative families comprised of same-sex partners and their adopted children. I think that Pope Francis certainly made great changes in terms of embracing the LGBTQ plus community and extending blessings to the community. And I hope that this Pope doesn't roll back.
I'm gonna give him come to that.
I personally don't need a pope to tell me that because the Bible already says so. But again, that means a lot for the people in the world, but some are upset about that as well. But what's more significant now, this pope is a bridge builder. He is a pontific maximus. So he's building bridges between Catholicism, the world, the secular world. He is looking to unite. So what is the term bridge builder all about? And I did some digging here. Bridge builder, path maker. This term is known as Pontifex Maximus. It was first used among the early Romans in 509 BC. The early Roman republics took on that term. And we are told the first individual who began to use the term was Julius Caesar, was elected Pontifex Maximus in BC 63. Imperial era, the term was again used by Augustus. At the rise of Christianity, the term Pontifex Maximus began to lose its value. Emperor Gratian renounced it as a pagan title. However, when Emperor Justinian gave the key of the pagan Rome to papal Rome, and the priests now took on the throne. We are told that the term was adapted by the Pope. It became a bridge builder, Pontifex Maximus, and it's been transitioned, passed down from one pope to another. So this is not a new term. It has a pagan origin. It was used by the Romans, but the Pope has also taken on this title. I was on a live stream with Joanna, and we were speaking about this term, Pontifex Maximus, and one thing she said was very interesting. Rome used this term by building bridges. Rome overcame the world.
It does, and it goes back to the whole idea of Rome actually conquered the world by building bridges. That's why we've got that saying, all roads lead to Rome. They actually conquered the world by building the roads that led to Rome.
That's a good one. I didn't know that one. Okay. Now, I wonder, is this going to happen again? In the name of building bridges, in the name of getting people to concede and make concession to Rome, in the name of unity and love. What kind of love are we talking about? What kind of unity are we talking about? Unity in the truth of the word of God? Or unity under so-called common good? I'll let you define. In the name of building bridges, Rome conquered the ancient world. Could it be that papal Rome, in the name of building bridges, ecumenical dialogue, interfaith dialogues, interfaithism, unity, love, will they again conquer the world?
La pace sia con tutti voi.
Daniel speaks of a king with fierce countenance who understands dark sentences. You see, the world cannot understand how the papacy is moving. You got to go back to history to understand what's happening here. Now, let me bring Dr. Conrad Vine to let him wrap up this video. Link in the description below. Listen to his remarks on some of the claims of the popes. And he went back also to Pope Leo XIII, Pope Leo X, and show you some things that were extremely interesting. This is only a segment. If you want more, make sure you go watch the video in the description below. Take a listen to this.
Quanta Cura, which is available at the Vatican website, the Pope was condemning as erroneous opinion or heresy the idea that liberty of conscience and liberty of worship is each person. And so they were reacting to the demands for religious freedom that was circulating across Europe at the time. Now, attached to that document, and this is a very famous document here from Catholic history, you have this document here called the Syllabus of Errors. And this Syllabus of Errors was issued with Quanta Cura back in 1864. And in it, Pope Pius IX listed systematically a whole series of erroneous ideas, false ideas that the Catholic Church could never accept. So, for instance, I listed out individually, and they're not that hard to read. The language isn't that complex. So the 15th error that Pope Pius IX identified was this, quote, that every man is free to embrace and profess that religion which, guided by the light of reason, he shall consider true. So the idea that that every person has liberty of conscience and may choose their own religion was condemned by Pope Pius IX. He goes on in number 17 to say that he condemns this idea, the idea that, quote, good hope at least is to be entertained of the eternal salvation of all those who are not at all in the true Church of Christ, end quote. So in this condemnation, the Pope Pius IX was condemning the idea that there is salvation outside of the Catholic Church. And then error 24, he condemns this idea, quote, the Church has not the power of using force, nor has she any temporal power, direct or indirect, end quote. So he was condemning the idea that the papacy cannot use physical force or compulsion or coercion to achieve its spiritual goals. And then idea 26, he condemned the following idea that says, quote, the Church has no innate and legitimate rights of acquiring and possessing property. The Catholic Church wanted to claim the right to own and collect property. The idea number 30 he condemned, quote, the immunity of the Church and of ecclesiastical persons derived its origin from civil law, end quote. So the Pope believed that the immunity of the Church came from intrinsically who the Church of Rome is, and that the civil law did not have any jurisdiction over the affairs of priests, for instance, and the Pope was rejecting any idea that immunity is something granted by the civil power rather than something intrinsic to the Catholic hierarchy and under Catholic law. And it rejected heresy number 42. Says this: in the case of conflicting laws enacted by the two powers, the civil law prevails. So Pope Pius IX was rejecting the idea that the civil law overrides canon law, that is the law of the Church, or by implication, the Pope was saying that the Church's law, canon law, would always override the demands of civil law. Just a couple more of these errors in the syllabus of errors. 54 says this: kings and princes are not only exempt from the jurisdiction of the Church, but are superior to the Church in deciding questions of jurisdiction, end quote. So in this era, the Pope was condemning the idea that civil authorities are exempt from being under the jurisdiction of the Church, and that the civil authorities, princes and kings, etc., are superior to the Church in deciding questions of jurisdiction. So essentially, the Pope was saying here that the Pope has jurisdiction over the civil authorities. In error 55, this is a very famous error. He says the Church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the Church. And so, end quote. So in that particular error, the Pope was condemning the separation of Church from state. He's already gone on previously in the errors he's condemning to condemn ideas that civil authority is more important than the papal authority, that civil rulers are free of the jurisdiction of the papacy, the Catholic Church, and then he condemns explicitly the idea that Church and state should be separate. So that's called the syllabus of errors, and you can read it online. It's freely available on the Vatican website. And these encyclicals are all supposed to be infallible. They're the magisterium, the teaching authority of the Church. So Pius IX was a reactionary pope. And it's interesting that the new Pope, Leo XIV, has taken the name Leo XIV because the Pope after Pius was Leo XIII. And Leo XIII, he was wrestling with how do you balance the demands of modernity and the modern worldview and people accepting evolution instead of creation, and people pushing Marxism instead of what went before, which is kind of a version of capitalism. And so the Pope Leo XIII was struggling with how does the Catholic Church respond to the demands of modernity, and how does the Catholic Church respond to civil authorities such as secular republics who no longer see a preeminent role for the Catholic Church within their public life. And so you see this particularly in the French history in the 1900s, where you have the French monarchies who were Catholic, and then you had the French republics that were secular. And if you look at, for instance, the Dreyfus affair of the Jewish army officer who was wrongly accused of selling military secrets to the German authorities in the almost end of the 1800s, you see very clear evidence that the Catholic hierarchy was using that affair to get rid of the Republic and to bring back a monarchy that would be favorable to the Catholic Church. And so Pope Leo XIII, he comes into this era of philosophical and ideological turbulence. And one of his most famous encyclicals, and this is the one that the new Pope read from when he spoke with the cardinals, was called Rerum Novarum, on the condition of the working class. And this was a very, very famous encyclical. So the background was that Protestantism enabled capitalism to take place. And capitalism was taking off across Europe wherever Protestantism went, with freedom of thought, freedom of expression, no longer subject to dogma from distant rulers. Wherever Protestantism went, there was economic resurgence and economic growth. There was the rise of empires, and there was the rise of trading cities. And you had places like Hamburg and Rotterdam that were free cities where people went, and that's where the thinkers, the scientists, the philosophers of the age were going, and they were fleeing to Protestant lands. And so, in response to this, Pope Leo the 13th to act himself with you might say against the Reformation, against capitalism, and so in Rerum Novarum the papacy found a new ally to help destroy capitalism, which was Marxist ideology. Now, what he said on page 36 is this, and this is what Leo the 13th wrote. He said, "To own goods privately, as we saw above, is a natural right to man. And to exercise this right, especially in life and society, is not only lawful, but also clearly necessary." And we would all agree with that. But then he goes on to say this, "But if the question be asked, how ought man to use his possessions, the church replies without hesitation, as to this point, man ought not to regard external goods as his own, but as common." End quote. And so the Rerum Novarum encyclical was laying the groundwork for what eventually turned into fascism in Nazi Germany. And why would I say that? Because Leo the 13th made a distinction between private legal ownership of property, like you could own a factory, but then he said, but you must use it for the common good, and it must be put to the common public use. And that's the underpinning economic and legal theory for 20th century fascism. So communism states that the state must own the means of production and also the distribution of the fruit of that production. But in fascist states, the property is privately owned, but it is controlled by the government for public use. And so Pope Leo the 13th, he was laying what was later the foundation for fascism by saying, yes, you can have private ownership, but also by then saying, but it must be used for the common good. And so 40 years later, another pope, Pius XI, issued an encyclical called the 40th Year, or Quadragesimo Anno, which was a celebration of Novarum Rerum. And in that, he denounced the dictatorship of capitalism, particularly those who controlled credit and the flow of money. And the writings of Pius XI in 1931, with a denunciation of money lending and capitalism and bankers, was viewed by many as being anti-Semitic, because at the time you had the rise of Nazi Germany, and many people were denouncing the Jewish population for their large influence in the banking sector. And so Rerum Novarum is a document that the new Pope actually read from this last week when he met with the new cardinals, and he chose the name Leo XIV to reflect the actions of Leo XIII. And so the first thing we'd say is that Leo XIII was arguing for property must be used for the common good. And the new Pope also specifically mentioned his support of Vatican II. Now, Vatican II had an encyclical issued called Gaudium et Spes, which is Joy and Hope, in 1965. And that says this, and I'm quoting, it says, "It is the right of public authority to prevent anyone from misusing his private property to the detriment of the common good." End quote. And so Vatican II takes up the idea that it is the right of the public authority to prevent you from using your private economic assets in any way other than what the public authority would determine is in the public good. And then after Vatican II, Paul VI continued this idea in Populorum Progressio in 1967, another encyclical, where he said, quote, "All rights whatsoever, including those of property and of free commerce, are to be subordinated to this principle, that is the principle of the common good." And so John Paul II applied the principle of the common good, and by then it became known as the universal destination of all goods. And in the writings of John Paul II, all rights, including religious liberty and freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, are subordinated to the universal destination of all goods, or the common good, and that's something that's defined by the papacy. So since Rerum Novarum, the encyclical that issued by Leo XIII all those years ago, I forget the year it was about 1881 or so. Since that encyclical, the popes have followed an ever stronger path of saying that yes, you can have private property, but it must be used for the common good, and the common good is that which is determined by the public authority. And as you look through the writings of these popes, you see that the papacy claims the right to determine what is the common good. And as you said earlier, Dr. O, that's what lays the groundwork for Revelation 13, where the papacy is determining economic mandates on a global level if you don't accept their definition of the common good. Boniface VIII, for instance, in 1302, gave a very famous encyclical called Unum Sanctum, and he said, quote, "Consequently, we declare, state, define, and pronounce that it is altogether necessary to salvation for every human creature to be subject to the Roman pontiff," end quote. And then Pius the Ninth, or the 11th, who just mentioned him, who did the 40th year encyclical in 1931 in honor of the teaching Novarum Rerum of Pius of Leo the 13th. When that 40th year encyclical came out in 1931, it says this, quote, "We lay down the principles long since clear established by Leo the 13th, that it is our right and our duty to deal authoritatively with social and economic problems," end quote. So our new Pope he explicitly spoke about his support for Vatican II. He's explicitly taken the name of Leo XIV after Leo XIII, and Leo XIII was he and those following him were arguing that the papacy is to have supreme authority in the world, not just in spiritual matters, but in economic and social questions as well. And so when I'm hearing the new Pope use this language, and he's quoting from Rerum Novarum and modeling himself after Leo XIII, as an Adventist, that this raises a whole exactly what prophecy says the papacy is going to do.
That's right.
And now there's another encyclical that people are not talking about that was issued by Leo XIII, and I was downloading it in preparation for discussion, and it's called Libertas. And Libertas was issued by Pope Leo XIII. Let me just get the date. It was in 1888. So it came just before Rerum Novarum. And in this passage here, Pope Leo XIII was trying to mediate, or should we say, row back some of the extreme language of Pius IX with his syllabus of errors, which was against any and all kinds of liberty. And in Libertas, Leo XIII was trying to strike a balance. So he was arguing for freedom of the press and free speech and things like this. But it's interesting that in the writings of Libertas, this encyclical, which is also available on the papal website, Vatican website, I'm just reading through it here. It's interesting when they discuss liberty of conscience and religious freedom. Leo XIII was not in favor of absolute religious liberty. So, for instance, he argues. For instance, he says, I'm just looking through the bits I've underlined here. He says, "Wherefore civil society," this is paragraph 21 of Libertas, he says, "Civil society must acknowledge God as its founder and parent, and must obey and reverence his power and authority. Justice therefore forbids, and reason itself forbids, the state to be godless." Goes on to say, "or to treat the various religions, as they call them, alike, and to bestow upon them promiscuously equal rights and privileges." So he's arguing against a secular government that gives equal rights to all religions. He goes on to say, quote, "Since then, the profession of one true religion is necessary in the state, that religion must be professed which alone is true, and which can be recognized without difficulty, especially in Catholic states. And so this religion, therefore, the rulers of the state must preserve and protect." So he's arguing there that the states have a moral responsibility to preserve and protect the Catholic faith, and he is denouncing the freedom that governments give for all religions to prosper within their countries. And so he goes on to say liberty of speech, and he says that yes, people have liberty of speech, but it's not an absolute liberty. He goes on to say, "We must now consider briefly liberty of speech and liberty of the press. It is hardly necessary to say that there can be no such right as this, if it not be used in moderation, and if it pass beyond the bounds and ends of all true liberty. For right is a moral power which, it is absurd to suppose that nature has accorded indifferently to truth and falsehood to justice and injustice. Men have a right freely and prudently to propagate throughout the state things whatsoever are true and honourable, so that as many people may possess them. But lying opinions, than which no mental plague is greater, and vices which corrupt the heart and moral life, should be diligently repressed by the public authority, lest they insidiously work the ruin of the state. End quote. So in this passage here, the Pope says, yes, freedom of speech is good and freedom of the press is good, but it is only good insofar as those who speak the truth. And the truth is that which is determined by the papacy. And anything that is not true, i.e. that which is not supported by the papacy, it says there, must be diligently repressed by public authority, end quote. And so we saw this all through the Middle Ages, where, a Tyndale translated the Bible into English, and for his pains, he was burnt alive at the stake, ultimately by the King of England. But Wycliffe, he translated the Bible into England in the mid-1300s. 40 years after he died, such was the hatred of him by the Catholic priests that they dug up his body and burnt the bones and crushed them into powder and then scattered his ashes in a river to float out to the North Sea. So what we see in this encyclical Libertas is that the Leo the 13th did not support absolute freedom of speech, and he did not support the absolute freedom of the press. And then he goes on to say in point 30, paragraph 30, and this is where it really hits home, Dr. Ove, for the mark of the beast. It says this: another liberty is widely advocated, namely liberty of conscience. If by this is meant that everyone may, as he chooses, worship God or not, it is sufficiently refuted by the arguments already adduced. So what he's saying there is that nobody, you do not have liberty of conscience, that is the ability to worship God or not worship God according to your conscience. And of course, that right is enshrined in the US Constitution in the first Bill of Rights, which is why the papacy hates the US Bill of Rights and the US Constitution, because it guarantees religious liberty to American citizens. It goes on to say, quote, "For the right to command and to require obedience exists only so far as it is in accordance with the authority of God and is within the measure that he has laid down." And so this Pope Leo the 13th is talking once again that liberty of conscience is something that can be commanded. It is not an absolute right, and actually that the church has a responsibility to moderate and manage liberty of conscience. And so, to sum it up, this is what he says. He says, "And now to reduce, for clearness' sake, to its principal heads all that has been set forth with its immediate conclusions, the summing up in this briefly, quote, that man, by necessity of his nature, is wholly subject to the most faithful and enduring power of God, and that as a consequence any liberty except that which consists of submission to God and in submission to his will is unintelligible," end quote. And so as the Pope is God on earth, and the Pope through her dogma, the papacy through her dogmas, is the only one that can interpret scriptures, it means that the freedoms we enjoy as Protestants and as Americans today are unintelligible if they are not subject to submission to God or his representatives on earth, that is the papacy.